area up here is part of the cerebrum, right? This is actually the right hemisphere of the cerebrum. If you take a look at a whole brain, and move over here for a second, you guys cut it straight down through this line that runs down the middle. That's called the longitudinal fissure. All right, there's also a fissure that runs, hang on, let me show you on here, across the back that separates the cerebellum from the cerebrum. All right, so if we look at, we have the cerebrum up here. This is the cerebellum. Don't confuse the two. They have similar parts to their names, so you know, be sure to keep those separate. Looking at the cerebrum, I should have left my glove on. The gyri and sulci. The gyri are the parts that are sticking up.
The white?
The whitish, yeah. And then the sulci, where you see the dark, that's actually blood from blood vessels. But the sulci would be the indents that those blood vessels are lying in, okay? If we go back then to the brain, let's start at the back part. The brain can really be divided into three parts: the hindbrain, midbrain, and forebrain. All right, and we'll talk about that more in lecture, but the hindbrain really starts where the spinal cord ends. So everything from here to the right on the screen, that's spinal cord. So notice here's the cerebellum. Right there back is spinal cord. All right, from here, if you trace along the bottom here, you can see there's about half of it. You come about halfway up, you come to kind of an indent. That first half, this area in here is the medulla oblongata. And then the second half, this area in here, is the pons. All right, the medulla oblongata, pons, and cerebellum together are the hindbrain. And that's where the brain controls things like balance, some of the basic functions like heart rate and breathing and things like that, all right? When we talk about respiratory, we'll talk about a respiratory center in the medulla oblongata of the brain.
Can you say it again? What is it?
Now, this is not on the lab exam, but just to give you a full perspective, the hindbrain focuses mostly on, like the cerebellum maintains balance, the medulla oblongata controls heart rate, respiratory rate, so you have just kind of some basic keeping you alive.
Involuntary stuff?
Yeah, a lot of involuntary, yeah, that's a good way to put it. And the pons is really more like a bridge between the hindbrain and
There's no real way to distinguish between.
right, like there's no like line here. It's just if you kind of follow along the bottom here, you should see that there's, and in this one it's not as obvious, but there's kind of like an indent about a third or half the way up. It just dips in a little bit, and then the rest of it is the pons. All right, and then you get into the midbrain. Midbrain is just kind of the region in here, and it's really just like a bridge as well. And then this is the thalamus, not thymus, thalamus. Be sure you keep those two separate, right? And down below, right in this area, is the hypothalamus. What does hypo mean? Less than, lower. So hypothalamus is lower than the thalamus, and it might not be super easy to see, but you can sometimes make out a slightly different color. It's just a real small part. You probably took a chunk off down here. The pituitary was in there. You don't need to know that, but that's a very important gland that helps control many glands of the endocrine system. It controls like when ovaries and testes release their hormones. And then when you come over here, what you're seeing from the side here, that's part of the optic nerve. All right, so if I turn it on its ventral side, you can see
Optic chiasm.
the optic nerve here. We can't see the optic chiasma because that's where the two optic nerves cross. But when you have your whole brain and you're looking at it here, you can see here's one optic nerve, here's another one. They cross, and the right optic nerve goes into the left brain, and the left optic nerve goes into the right brain, the right hemisphere. So it's kind of weird. Your brain, the right side deals with what your left eye sees, and the left side deals with what your right eye sees.
Like your heart.
Don't worry, your brain puts it together so that it makes sense to you. All right. What else do we have then? The structure here is the corpus callosum or callosum, And that is kind of this, long structure. It connects the right and left hemispheres of the cerebrum together so that signals can be sent from one side of the brain to the other. Anything else that you guys, olfactory bulbs. Yes, we have one on here. They can detach pretty easily when you're taking off the meninges. This is one olfactory bulb. There would be another one right here on the other half of the brain. You can see before we remove the meninges, those are the olfactory bulbs. They have a different type of color to the tissue. All right? And those are for what? Smelling. All right? Animals that rely on their sense of smell to a greater extent have bigger olfactory bulbs. They're pretty small comparative to most mammals. Sheep, they have pretty small olfactory bulbs. They don't need to smell their prey. They probably smell each other, their young, their mates, and they eat plants, so they don't do a lot of smelling around for their food. All right? Anything else that I forgot?
Is it that you could only really see the thalamus from the inside?
Yeah, you can't see the thalamus from the outside. Yeah, you can see the pons and the medulla from the underside, the ventral side of the brain, but you can't see the thalamus or the corpus callosum unless you cut it in half. Constantine?
What's about glossopharyngeals and vagus?
We're not going to look at those nerves. Yeah, don't worry about those.
But
All right.
made for what?
Those are some of the major nerves in the body that take signals from different